Welcome out to Sunday school this morning. We're actually we're doing a unit review. Pastor Cody, due to a couple things, is a couple weeks behind, so we're going to do a review. We'll see how far we get along, and we'll either continue to review next week, or we might just come up with something different next week, just till we get ready to start again. Of course, as we know, as we move ahead, we'll be getting on into Jacob and the life of Jacob, but we've pretty much worked through the life of Abraham, and I've tried to write down a few different things and think about what to do this morning for review. And like I said, we've kind of got next week to go as well, so I think I'm just going to take the Bible and we'll start and see where we end up. But we'll pray and get started. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, your many blessings. Thank you for this opportunity we have to come to Sunday school. I pray, Lord, this morning that as we review, that you'll recap in our minds maybe some things that we learned along the way the last few weeks. Lord, may you bring some things back to remembrance. Pray for Bible school this week as those prepare for it, Lord. I pray that you'll just give everyone strength, give them a good week, Lord, to be able to come and teach, and may souls be saved for the furtherance of Christ's kingdom. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Genesis 12 this morning, we're going to pick up here. Like I said, this is just a recap, a review of the last several weeks, so most of this you've already heard. But again, we'll just take the Bible and kind of hit on some high spots through here. So in Genesis chapter 12, we see the call, if you will, of Abraham. And of course, at this point, we made it all the way through to where his name was changed. But if you back up to Genesis 12, he's known as Abram. So if we read just here in verse 1, and just again, if you got your Bibles this morning, just follow along. We're just going to take off and see where we end up. But Genesis 12, verse 1, it says, "Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house into a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed." If you look down to verse number 7, it says, "And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him." So here's the call of Abraham, and as I was kind of reading and studying this, one thing that we didn't cover last time was, we talk about it a lot, but it is a huge step, and I know that it was done different in that day than it would be now, but we know that here in just a few verses that Abraham had a great substance. He had a lot of cattle, he had a lot of money, a lot of, so big that, of course, him and Lot had to separate ways, or to part ways. So as I was reading this, one of the commentators had said, could you imagine a day that Abraham would have walked into the bank? And of course, we know it didn't work like that then, but that he walked into the bank and said, I'm here to withdraw out my money. I'm here to withdraw out my gold bullion or my silver or whatever. And, and of course, any bank manager would say, well, where are you going? We've probably got a branch there. I'll call ahead of you. And I mean, no doubt this is Abraham. I mean, they roll out the red carpet for him, and I'm sure he was very wealthy, and said, where are you going? Can I get you, I'll call ahead of you and get a bank ready, get the manager there and let them, they'll be waiting for your gold bullion there and your silver and all your stuff. And, and Abraham basically says, well, God appeared to me and he's called me out of my own country, and he wants me to serve him. And they said, well, that's good. We're happy to hear that for you. And but again, just tell us where you're going, and we'll have a branch of the bank there, or maybe one of our sub companies. We'll get in contact with you, and him be like, well, I don't really know where I'm going. This is not my home anymore. I'm just passing through. I'm looking ahead, as we learn in Hebrews, to a city whose builder and maker's God, and I don't really know where I'm going. And, could you imagine, as if we lived in a day like today, what the conversation would be after he left? Well, golly, he'd make national news. Look at this crazy man. He's withdrew all his money, and he's just following God, and he don't even know where he's going, but he knows he's going somewhere. And, so we think about that even in today's thinking that, for him to do that would be crazy. But the same thing is said a lot of times when men are called to preach, when someone's called to the mission field, and you mean to tell me you're going to pack up your nice air-conditioned home and draw out all that you have to go to a foreign country and live and serve the Lord and not really even know where you're going or what language they speak? We make the same assumptions today about people serving the Lord. So we got to be careful about that. And the same could be said here about Abraham. And then we see, as you go kind of through these ebbs and flows, if you will, Abraham set off on his journey here, but there was a famine in verse 10 in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they shall kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, that thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. I'm reminded here, I think I used to hear, I think it was Matt Harold actually used to say this a lot of times, and then of course you hear it, other people have this phrase true as well, but a half-truth is a whole lie. And that's kind of what he was doing there, was a half-truth is still a whole lie. And, I guess I always pick on Abraham here, and of course we know that he does it again later on over a few chapters. But, the one thing that I've always told y'all, and we'll just touch on it again this morning real quick, but when you go on down in verse 17, it says, And the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? Why saidst thou, She is my sister, so I might have taken her to be to me to wife? Now therefore, behold, thy wife, take her and go thy way. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away, and his wife, and all that he had. So if you remember, when he goes down here, he makes up this story, and of course it's a half-truth, but it turns into a whole lie. And God plagued Pharaoh, and that's what I've always been intrigued about when you see these things. It happens over and over again that God plagues Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of what Abram told him and what Abram said, that, well, this is my sister. And so again, we see this phrase, and I always mention it and bring it up, and it says in verse number 18, What is this that thou hast done? And again, it's always concerned me as being a Christian, that would I be that type Christian that somebody could say to me, what is this that thou hast done, Matthew? What because you've done wrong, God's now plaguing or affecting someone else. And, you say, well, is that really... Well, if you think about it, the first mention of a phrase like this, we see it all the way back in the very beginning when we started our lesson series in the Garden of Eden. When the serpent came along and the Adam and Eve sinned, and we go through and God asked them, said, who told you you were naked? And then he gets down to verse 13 of chapter 3 in Genesis, and he says, What is this that thou hast done? And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. So if you go back to that first mentioned principle, if you will, that you see that whole phrase, not just a word, but that entire phrase, What is this that thou hast done? God asked Eve that, and she said, well, that serpent, he beguiled me. And that word beguiled means to deceive or to mislead the mind. So an outside influence here has influenced the situation. So no matter what happened before, an outside influence now has influenced the situation. So in Eve's case, it influenced Adam. And of course, because it influenced Adam, now it's influenced all of mankind, right? So the same thing here. Because of Abraham's case, you had Sarai, his wife, Sarah. And now the effect was that Pharaoh and all of Egypt was plagued because Abraham told a half-truth which turned into a whole lie. So I think that, again, if you think about us and where does this come into us? What is this that thou hast done? Well, the Bible talks all the time about being a stumbling block. And, I think, again, that, when others see Christians doing something they shouldn't, then the same could be said as, what is this that thou hast done? Because it's almost like you're beguiling, which that's a big word, and boy, we don't want that word linked with us because it's linked with the serpent in Genesis 3, but we're literally deceiving or influencing someone's mind to say, well, wait a minute, I thought that they were a Christian. Well, wait a minute. And they act like that on Monday morning, or they act like that on Tuesday, and I think sometimes if God looks down on us, would he say, what is this that thou hast done? You've affected your entire workplace because you could have went and invited them to church. Listen, if everybody in this room almost pretty much has been under Pastor Chuck and the sound of his voice preaching the word for many, many years. And one story he often tells was when he worked in those iron factories in Ohio, and men, before he became a Christian, he said he would see the same men that would invite him to revival would be the same men that would be telling dirty jokes in the break room. And he said, man, I didn't want none of that. And it confused him. And man, I don't know. I remember he's told that story hundreds of times. And if you think about that, it applies here. It's like, well, what is this that thou hast done? Those same men could have been good Christian influences, but praise the Lord that Preacher Chuck got saved anyway. But it's just, again, we have to be careful about what we do. Our reputation, there we go, precedes us. And, and we've got to be very careful. And I think that's a great truth there. Not to beat up on Abraham, but that's a great truth. And we know that when Abraham in chapter 13, as we continue our recapping this morning, that it says in chapter 13, verse 1, and Abram went up out of the land of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him into the south. And if you remember, God basically made him start over because he went back to Bethel and to the place in verse 3 where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai. So here God says, Abraham, it hadn't changed. We're going to continue. I want you to keep going forward. I want you to follow me. It says in verse 4, and to the place of the altar which he had made there at the first, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So now one of the great stories as we carry on is the stage is kind of set now back in Abraham and Lot and their cattle and their farming and their livestock. And what a wonderful story that starts right here. I love this. Verse number 6 says, and the land was not able to, let's back up to verse 5. So chapter 13, verse 5. And the Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents, and the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. So again, just a refresher on the story. Like we've said, now we will beat up on Lot a little bit this morning. I mean, Lot would have been better off, said, listen, I'll thin my herds down. I'll sell some cattle or sheep or whatever we got, and I'm just going to stay right here because this is where I need to be. I don't need to be going toward Sodom and Gomorrah. But no, they decided that they were going to part ways. And again, this was a great demonstration about Abraham and the kind of man that he was. Because if you'll look here in verse number 9 where we stopped, it says, "Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left." I think that shows a lot of just character about Abraham and the kind of man that he was. I mean, he said, "Listen, we don't want any trouble. I've got a bigger name than you've got, so I'm going to pick and you take the leftovers." He said, "Listen, if you pick right, I'll take left. You pick left, I'll take right. It's going to be that simple." And as we know, Lot, in the remaining of the verses, he lifted up his eyes and he saw that this land that was before him was good for cattle, and it was better for cattle than it was a place to raise his children and his family. And of course, we know that story and we know what happened. Again, the love of money is the root of all evil. Not that having money is evil, but the love of money. So again, you could say, I will pick on Lot. Maybe that wasn't the option, but I'm telling you, I'd have sold everything I had and told him. Elijah told Elisha, you don't need to come along with me or whatever. And Elisha said, "No, I'm coming. I'm coming with you." And you see that sometimes in the Bible when people say, don't. If you look at the story of Ruth, same thing. Go back to your country. Well, no, I'm staying right here with you. And I think, again, Lot had that opportunity here to say, "Listen, Abraham, I don't care what you say. I'll sell out. I'll sell out and I'll pay you rent till the money runs out, and then I guess I'll work for you. But I'm staying right here." But no, we know it didn't work that way. And Lot chose, in verse number 11, him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves, the one from the other. So then Abraham, of course, is dwelling there in the land. Now, so many times, and of course, as y'all have learned, and y'all are sick of me probably talking about it, but this is probably one of the greatest stories, just action stories in the Bible coming up. And, we have a lot of superheroes now. We got Batman, Spider-Man, but we got Abraham. So this is a great story. And so, but I think there's a big underlining point behind all this. You've got Lot that, in my opinion, just my opinion, should have sold out and said, "Nope, I'm staying right here." But he didn't do that. And we know that Sodom and Gomorrah was a wicked place. It says, "But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly." And Lot went from pitching his tent towards Sodom to we find him at the gate of Sodom. We find him living in the streets of Sodom. There's so many messages you can even preach and teach out of that. He went here from just pitching his tent towards Sodom till there was a day we found him at the gates. And then when the angels went down there, we're right inside his home, ain't we? So, just again, over and over and over. But so many times as Christians, when we make a wrong decision, God brings us out. He does something to allow an effect in our life to get us back on the right track. And I truly believe, looking at this story, that Lot had that chance happen. And he missed his chance. And this stirs into one of the great stories here in the Bible. So what I'm trying to say is, during this time, there was a time frame that took place. And these kings, 4 kings against 5, began to wage war and battle, and they like to take the spoil from these cities and these other countries, whatever you want to call them, because they're kings. So I don't know if they're just cities or bigger or smaller type countries. But you've got these 4 kings against these 5, and Sodom and Gomorrah's kings get mixed up in this. And If you see there in chapter number 14, down in verse number 10, it says, "And the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountains. And they took all the goods," talking about these other kings that were that were coming to get the goods and get the spoil. "So they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed." So if you just read this story and you didn't know that you've heard it 100 times, and you stopped there, you'd say, well, see, that's what that old sinner gets for going down there and backsliding Christian and going towards Sodom and Gomorrah. See, boy, the Lord took care of that. He's done got him, and this bunch of kings has done drug him out of there. Boy, that's a sad story. And aren't we guilty of that so many times? We'll look at teenagers or kids that grew up in this church and say, boy, look, I remember when they helped in Bible school and stuff, and now look at them, boy, they're down there on the streets, or they're in AA meetings, and we say all that stuff, and you could stop the story right here and say the same thing about Lot and say, well, boy, look, he chose Sodom and Gomorrah, and now look where it got him. But we know the rest of the story. So it don't just end there. So that's the good thing about the Bible. We see the whole picture many times. So now Lot has been taken. So then there's this one that came out, and he went and got word to Abraham. Now this is one of those, again, this is like better than Batman, better than Superman, better than this is one of my favorite stories. This is your first ever SEAL Team 6 right here. Abraham's SEAL Team 6. They thought that they invented that. When the Navy come up with that, no, that was Abraham did that. So Abraham, and this is what I think's miraculous about this story, is you've got, I don't care if they're kings of countries, and one of these days I'll look some of those up and try to do that studying, but you got kings that are battling, whether it's enormous cities or, this isn't just this guy, this isn't the Hatfields and McCoy feud here, and Abraham's going to step in between. We got kings, countries, we got cities involved here. So Abraham hears about Lot, and again, this is another one of those situations where a Christian takes action. So many times, again, I don't want to paint the wrong picture here, but so many times we as Christians say, well, I'm going to pray for them. I'm going to take care of them. And I mean that. We say those things. We say, well, this happened. Well, I'm going to pray for them, or I'm going to do this. Well, this is a time where here's a Christian that not only said, well, I'm going to pray, but I'm going to go do something about it. And, I've always said that about, and I don't say it braggingly. I say it really under conviction, because it really scares me, because it would get me in trouble. That's where my flesh would rear up its ugly head. I'm telling you, if anybody ever hurts my children or takes my children, I'm just going to tell you, I ain't praying about nothing. I'm going to take care of it, period. That can be fleshly, that can be sinfully, that can be wrong, but I'm telling you, it scares me, because I'm telling you. And this is Abraham too. I really like this. He says, listen, I'm not just going to pray for Lot. Boy, I hate what happened to him. Boy, I hate that Lot went the way of Sodom and Gomorrah. I told him this was going to happen. No, listen, Lot went down there and got 318 men. They was born in his house. He trained them up. They kept the cattle. They kept the sheep. They apparently knew how to hunt and provide some food, because they were men that knew how to fight. And they wasn't going to dance out in there. And this is what I'm telling you, this is a great story, because this ain't the British Army either. They ain't going to dance out there in their little dainties, and they're going to line up and shoot, and then the next one takes their turn and shoot. They thought the swamp fox was the first to do this undercover warfare, but you're getting ready to see Abraham's SEAL Team 6 fight. He goes and gets 318 men, and they start pursuing them. Now listen to the story. It says, and when Abraham, verse 14 of chapter 14, and when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. Now watch this. See, he just ain't jumping out there, and I mean, this has got SEAL Team Road all over it. And he divided himself against them. So he didn't come just marching out and say, well, we're going to announce that we're here. He said, boys, some of y'all go that way, some of y'all go this way. He divided them up against them, he and his servants, by night. Again, if you ask any military operation, we go in at night. You hunt at night when the enemy's least suspected, when it's asleep. So he went in by night, and he smote them, and pursued them unto Hobah, and which is on the left hand of Damascus, and he brought back. Now this is what, so again, and I know I dramatize this, but I'm telling you, this is good stuff. This should be a movie right here. This is better than Batman. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and he smote them. Now, he not only smote them, but listen, he pursued. So listen, there's some that ran, and I mean, he chased them down and got them too. He pursued them all the way. And not only that, but now he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. I mean, I like that the most. I mean, he not only whipped them, but he whipped them and took all the stuff back and got Lot. And you say, well, that's a real dramatized story. Well, the very next verse 17, tells you the Bible calls it this, so I'll just use what the Bible says. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter. From the slaughter. I mean, man, he slaughtered them. I mean, I'm not talking like took them, I'm talking killed them. The ones that ran, he chased them down and killed them too. And he slaughtered them, and then he got all the stuff and brought it back. Now, let's go back to Lot a second. So you've got Lot, where if you remember, you could say about him, well, that's a sad story. Here's a fellow Christian that looked the way of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's now chose his own path, and he got took by these kings. You could even say, well, he got what he deserved. Well, no. So Abraham went and got him, and he brought him back. So now this is where I believe this was Lot's very chance to make things right. You know, it's almost like the Lord said, Lot, listen, you didn't pick the right thing this time, so all these events have taken place. You almost could use our saying from a minute ago, right? What is this that thou hast done? Listen, you've caused a lot of death, a lot of heartache, because you chose the wrong path. I mean, would it have diverted the war? Probably not. They would have probably still come to Sodom and Gomorrah, but Abraham wouldn't have had no interest down there if you take Lot out. And I think that's why the Bible's very specific when it says, and remember, they took Lot with them, because I think that's telling us something that, listen, Abraham wasn't really concerned with Sodom and Gomorrah. He was concerned that they took Lot, his brother. They took Lot out of there. So now that gives Abraham some incentive. Now you got 318 men that's got to live with this great slaughter that they just took place, all because one person made the wrong choice. And again, it's that, what is this that thou hast done? Think about that. So now God gives Lot a second chance. He brings him out from this battle. And he's still alive, and the women's come also with him, and the people and the goods and all this. And then, of course, we're not going to talk about this week. That may be something we talk about next week. But we meet Melchizedek, and we talked about that. And again, it shows so much how the Sodomites and the that they were towards just the worldly things. So look at verse 21 now. We've jumped around everywhere. So let's look at chapter 14, verse 21. It says, And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, Give me the persons, and take the goods to thyself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the Professor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich. He said, listen, I don't want anything. But here's the thing, though, and we talked about this during that time. It's the same thing when you look at Lot. It's the same thing when you look at people. It's the same picture that Satan and the world and the Sodoms and the Gomorrahs and the Sodomites say today. Give me the people, give me the soul, and I'll give you the goods. And that's the same thing that Satan is painting in the minds and pictures of everybody across this land and our entire world. Is give me the souls and I'll give you the spoils. If you just give me your life, don't give it to Jesus, but we always wonder, why does sinful, David wrote about it in these Psalms all the time, why does the heathen, why do they prosper? Why do they do good? Well, right here, because they've made a deal with the devil, if you will. Satan said, listen, you give me your soul, you give me you, shoot, I'll give you the spoils, I'll give you all the goods, you can have whatever you want. And that's the same lie he told Jesus. That's how perverted he is when he stood and said, listen, if you'll bow down and worship me, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. Give me the person, you can have the spoils. That's all he wanted. That's all he ever wants. So again, we see that here as a picture of this in Sodom. So now we've got Lot. Lot's been brought out. And we go through, and of course now it's kind of hard to not continue to talk about Lot. Of course, some other things obviously happens. But so we had backed up. A few weeks ago, we had went on with the story of Lot, and like I said, it's very hard not to. But in between there is tucked when Abraham is trying to help God out, and Sarah's trying to help God out to give Abraham a son, and we meet Hagar, and then we meet Ishmael, his son by Hagar. So, again, we're not trying to help God out, but Abraham does. On over in chapter 17, we see Abram's name changed to Abraham. God basically reminds and renews the covenant with Abraham, that it's an everlasting covenant, that, this covenant's not dependent upon Abraham, but God made it, and if God makes it, it's going to come to pass. They get to talking about circumcision and about the token or the circumstances of the covenant, and as far as what they're supposed to do as far as the circumcision, as the token. There we go. I did use the right word. Sorry. So the token of the covenant when they were 8 days old. And of course, we know Abraham and all the folks of his household went ahead and did that as well. So we go through, and then the angels show up, and they look towards Sodom and Gomorrah. And I know I skipped through some of that. So if we go all the way over to chapter 18, if you remember this story, and I'm sure you do, they're standing there and looking towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and verse 24 of chapter 18 says, peradventure there'll be 50 righteous within the city. Will thou also destroy and not spare the place for the 50 righteous that are therein? And I told you that week that, I always think that that's, I can't ever help but to think when Jesus said in the New Testament that, us as Christians, we're the salt and the light of the world. We're the salt. We're, if the salt's lost its savor, but we're supposed to be a salty Christian. And, and I really believe that applies here, because basically they look down and say, well, boy, if we can find 50 salty Christians, if we can find 50 righteous, we'll spare it. 45, 40, 30, 20, get all the way down to 10. And verse 32, and says, and he said, oh, let not thy Lord be angry, and I will speak yet but this once. Peradventure 10 shall be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. So, there's times in life when this what is this that thou hast done phrase can be happen to good. In this case, we see it to the good. It's like, listen, the Lord said, if I can find 10 salty Christians down there, if I can find 10 righteous, I'm not going to destroy the city. So, boy, wasn't that a good cause and effect? But they couldn't even find 10. And again, just in closing this morning, and then we'll pick up next week and continue on. But getting back to Lot for a second. So, just to end this week on Lot. Lot had his chance there. He got took, and you could stop the story there, and you could say, well, see, that's what he gets for not following God. But that wasn't the end of the story. It kept going. And then the great story of Abraham SEAL Team 6, and then they brought Lot back. So now Lot's back, and he's got a chance. He's actually back physically with Abraham. But the sad part is in chapter 19, verse 1, it says, and there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. So that to me is just so sad, because I think that was a huge missed opportunity on Lot's behalf. Lot was so, we call it backslidden. He was so vexed in his spirit because of Sodom and Gomorrah, or whatever you want to call it, that even when God brought him out of it and put him right back in front of Abraham, I mean, could you imagine seeing the look on his face thinking he probably was going to die? And then all of a sudden you turn around and you hear this commotion, and there's Abraham standing there. And instead of listening to God and say, well, God, I missed that the first time. I'm sorry. I screwed up. No, he basically goes back to Sodom, and the next time we see him here, he's found down at the gate of Sodom. And I think it's so sad, because so many times we as Christians miss that. And, I tell the story all the time, because I could see Lot sitting and telling people and bragging and saying, and giving a testimony, testifying to it and saying, boy, you wouldn't believe what God did for me. Them kings, they come down there and they took Sodom and Gomorrah, and I mean, they drug us out by our head. They chained me up, and I didn't think I was ever going to see daylight again. And they took our women and our goods, and I mean, I was as good as dead. And one night, man, I heard a ruckus coming, and I looked up, and there's Abraham, and boy, look what the Lord has done for me. And then he turns right around and goes right back to Sodom. And what the Lord done for him was got him out of that mess and put him right back in front of Abraham. But he was either too backslidden or too invested to see it. And we find him back here at the gate of Sodom. And of course, y'all know the story, and we'll end with this. But it's obviously they come in, just a wicked, wicked place. I think it shows you how backslidden Lot is, and how his mind has been so affected by sin when he offers his own two daughters up to the men of the city instead of giving them the angels. I mean, I think that's the Bible's way of showing us just how wicked that, how that sin had soaked into Lot, that it just blinded him. And such a sad story. And finally they get out of there, and of course, I don't know if it was, I hate to call it humor, because I don't ever like to speak for God, but they stood there and looked at that city and said, boy, if I could just find 10 salty Christians that are serving and righteous, that I won't destroy it. And then as Lot and them's leaving, Lot's wife looks back, and guess what? She turns into a pillar of salt. And, he says, boy, if it had just been 9 more like you, I'd have spared it. And she looked back, and he turned her into a pillar of salt. Now, I don't think that's by